Thank you very much, Stephen. Well, there is more data to suggest that the South African economy is in life support. The Rand Merchant Bank and Bureau for Economic Research's Business Confidence Index has declined for a fifth consecutive quarter to reach 27 index points in the second quarter of 2023, down by 9 points from 36 points in the first quarter. This was the lowest level of confidence since the height of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 rather, and suggested that only roughly a quarter of businesses that were surveyed, that responded to the survey, were satisfied with prevailing business conditions. For more on this, I'm joined by Siobhan Redford, an economist at Rand Merchant Bank. Siobhan, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. The responses of the 1,050 executives across four major sectors varied, but what's the big overview? It's not a surprise, though, to hear that this business confidence is yet another decline, another nosedive, because we've seen the poor showing in yesterday's Q1 GDP data print.
Yes, I would agree with you. It's not the biggest surprise. I think, it really just shows us that, despite the fact that we were at least able to miss that technical recession in the first quarter, there are a number of kind of headwinds that are really affecting the economy, and it's starting to filter through even more so in the second quarter of the year. Bearing in mind, thinking about things like with constant load shedding, at very high levels persistent, that you're looking at things like higher costs of production, but also knowing that consumers are actually themselves quite constrained, which means that, passing on some of those costs is quite difficult. So a compression of profit margins for a number of respondents while dealing with this really challenging environment, and, also looking at consumers who now have a very high interest rate to face as well.
It's also not a surprise that the confidence was still supported. The little confidence that's there among businesses was supported by consumer-facing sectors in the first quarter of 2023, but amid a steep deterioration in sentiment for new vehicle sales, retailers, and to a lesser extent wholesalers. And that's because when you look at consumption and expenditure in the first quarter, according to the first quarter GDP numbers, that increased due to load shedding, people spending at restaurants and making sure that they have food on the table while the lights are out.
Yeah, so I think it's quite a tricky environment, as you say, for consumers. And so, as you say, your new vehicle dealers are starting to feel the pinch. And within the retailers themselves, there has been some support for, clothing and footwear, for example, as we are seeing greater movement, as more people are spending more days at the office and, maybe going to more events. We are now starting to see international, like, music events, for example, kind of coming to home ground. So there has been some kind of movement there, some demand then, also for your home items which are affected by frequent power surges as a result of load shedding. But, when you consider things like non-durables are actually quite weak, as was kind of your DIY side of the durables. So, the consumer-facing side has now kind of joined the rest of the economy in being quite downbeat. And I think why they are seeing things getting a little bit difficult and realizing that it's a more difficult environment is, if you think about it, the Reserve Bank talks about how it takes about 6 to 24 months for us to see, the impact of interest rate hikes kind of coming into the economy. And we're now at 18 months after the first hike, well, as at May. And that means you're round about the peak of the impact of that first hike. But now you've got all these other hikes that have come in, particularly during 2022, where there were some rather steep hikes. And that's also then going to affect demand by consumers. And let's not forget, there are also businesses which are being affected by these higher interest rates.
Siobhan, let's go through the various sectors in the SME sector, because a majority of these businesses are small businesses. What do they highlight about the sectors and how they feel currently about the current business conditions?
Yeah, current business conditions are particularly challenging. And I think when we look, when we look at the sectors that we consider, the really kind of the smallest businesses are going to be sitting in your retail sector, possibly some of your new motor vehicle dealers. So there are some concerns as well around the fact that we do have rand's weakness, that you are having to see imports increasing for manufactured goods which aren't being produced. Perhaps they're having to be imported. An increased amount of imports, perhaps for the purposes of alternative energy generation, and all of this while the currency is weaker. So it is also increasing that cost base that a lot of our businesses are seeing. I think it's worth bearing in mind that while we've spoken a lot about the consumer-facing side, while we see manufacturing having been quite flat, staying at 17 points for this print, 17 is very, very low for the sector, and it just shows what a difficult environment it is. And when you look at the results for the first quarter, yes, it had the highest growth rate at 1.5% quarter on quarter, but it's worth bearing in mind if you look at the level of manufacturing production in the economy overall, it remains below its pre-pandemic levels. And so, this is still a sector. This is a sector which is not managing to ramp up back to where we were before, and is being continuously hampered by these headwinds. Construction is really, your main contractors are probably the most upbeat out of everybody, and it's really because the building sector has had such a challenge. Even before the pandemic, it was already declining and shrinking, and so we're now starting to see kind of a normalization, an end of that of that shrinking, and kind of a slight recovery. But we even think that is going to be quite shallow.
There's a new concern among businesses, something that we haven't seen in the previous indices, and that is businesses are concerned about South Africa's diplomatic relations and how that is going to impact trade. I mean, in the past we've seen load shedding, inflation, interest rates, as some of the issues that businesses are concerned about. But this issue, I'm sure, has to do with the United States, Russia, and that docking of the BER ship.
Yes, it definitely is around that issue. I think the concerns, as you say, are with respect to the US, with respect to renegotiations over AGOA, potential sanctions. And, I think it's important to also remember it doesn't mean, there's also a chance that I think if South Africa as a country came out looking bad here, that, it's not necessarily only the US that would impose sanctions. That said, I think it is more of a concern and not something that we should be kind of knee-jerk reacting to and, let everything play out. It doesn't help, though, that there's also still the discussion over what happens with the BRICS summit, which is currently scheduled for August this year in South Africa. So, from a geopolitical point of view, we definitely are on what I would call shaky ground, and it definitely is concerning business.
Siobhan Redford, an economist at Rand Merchant Bank, thank you very much for your time.